The world is going through changes. Changes happening at a speed that we have never seen before. This is leading to disruption, chaos, panic, fear, hysteria, and a turbulent economy and marketplace. How do you protect your wealth in a turbulent world? How do you invest for cash flow in alternative assets to escape the rat race in times of uncertainty? How do you decentralize yourself, your family, your community, your business, and your investments to become sovereign and escape the matrix? If you are looking for strategies, tactics, and techniques to escape the rat race and matrix, you are in the right place. My name is MC Laubscher, and this is Cashflow Ninja. This is Cashflow Ninja. I'm MC Laubscher. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode and spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me on the show. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. That's cashflowninja.com. We have over 1,000 podcasts. We've got 4 books. We have a ton of reports, webinars, and much, much more. It's all at cashflowninja.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the #1 newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset investing space, the Wealth Dojo. You can subscribe to the Wealth Dojo by going to cashflowninja.com/subscribe. I've got a fantastic show for you today. I'm joined by Dr. Kolja Spori, also known as Dr. Dangerzone. Now, Kolja has traveled all of the countries in the world, and then he got into more adventurous traveling and started to travel to conflict zones. So yes, war zones, countries experiencing civil unrest, a lot of interesting stuff. And there's a unique community now, which he created around the world that does this. I mean, just to name a couple of the places, just since I've known Kolja and had conversations with him. He spent time in Chechnya. He spent time in the Ukraine. He spent time in Libya, in the jungles in Colombia. So, I mean, he's had quite an adventure going into these conflict and war zones. And he documents his journey and his travels in his new book, which has just come out, and his new book is Dr. Dangerzone. Yes, Dr. Dangerzone is the title of his new book, In Search of Truth in the Most Daring Places. Kolja is going to get into, these travels of his, what he learned, what he saw firsthand, and also why we usually get a much different story in the news, whichever news you consume these days, than what's actually happening in these conflict and war zones. I see him as one of the most interesting people I've met in this world, so always looking forward to conversations with Kolja. Dr. Dangerzone, great to see you.
So great to see you, MC. It's a good feeling to have friends over the Atlantic, not all of them, but our core group that we have with people who are ANCAP, anarcho-capitalist, cigar smokers, some of them, and we're a good bunch of people, and I'm always glad to connect back, and so happy to be back on your podcast in particular, MC. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Always appreciate our time together. For listeners, old and new, lots of new ones, can you share a little bit about your background and journey? Because you have a very unique background. And before we'll get into all the adventures and the new book, but give us a bit of your background and journey.
Yes, MC, I'm German. I was born in 1969 in the south of Germany, and my life became interesting when my parents moved to Istanbul when I was 11 years old, and I stayed there 6 years, high school in Istanbul, Turkey. And that was times when there was still the Iron Curtain everywhere. So we did some trips, early trips to Eastern European countries in those days. And I wouldn't have thought that this turns full circle at some point in my life. I'll have more on this a bit later. And so I wanted to become a windsurfing champion, and I went to the United States for the first time in 1987 to California and spent almost 3 months in Hawaii. I loved it at the time, and finished studies in economics, and did an internship in Hollywood, and was very much interested in the United States at the time, to be honest. And then I had my first job at Hugo Boss, the fashion company. I was the head of sponsorship, which was a dream job. I traveled all over the world in Formula One racing, IndyCar racing at the time with Penske, and also in the America's Cup. And I was also in the offshore powerboat racing circus. So I had, first of all, a dream job as an employee, but very short. I was only an employee for 3 years of my life, and then created my own business, became an entrepreneur in these sports. And when this became routine, I started to travel all over the world. I wanted to systematically visit every country, which I did in 2018. And as part of this traveling all over the world, I also had an interest developed in conflict zones, in war zones. And this brings me here today to introduce my book, which is my first book in English language, which is called Dr. Dangerzone. And I'm basically writing about the best trips of my life, 25 trips to the most extreme and remote and sometimes dangerous places. And yeah, so here we are, MC, and I hope I can have some interesting stories for your listeners this time.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So I also wanted to go back to when you left Hugo Boss and you started your own company. You guys did a lot of events around Formula One and all these other sports that you mentioned, and you did a lot of it in Monaco, where you're currently having a conversation from. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that is you met a lot of very interesting people, had a lot of very interesting experiences just in that world, because essentially, I think as far as from a network standpoint, it's the people that you meet all around the world, business people, entrepreneurs, leaders, and so forth. It's kind of like a hotbed where all those folks get together and connect, right?
Absolutely right, MC. Formula One is like a World Economic Forum every 2 weeks. This is how I used to market in those days. I wouldn't use this term nowadays, because the World Economic Forum is, of course, not what I thought it should be at the time. But certainly you have very interesting people, influential people, powerful people meeting at the races, at the Grand Prix, and it's quite easy to meet them if you're in the inner circle. So I do have a good contact network from those days and some friends. Obviously, in the sports world, I used to spend a lot of time with Michael Schumacher, who unfortunately now is not fit anymore after a very bad accident. I did some trips with Vladimir Klitschko, the heavyweight boxing champion at the time, from Ukraine. And I actually, with my company, ran the press office of Prince Albert in Monaco. And I've also had the duty to look after actors from Hollywood at the time. Had a small role in the Sylvester Stallone movie, which was initially about Formula One, but then he shifted to NASCAR, and it was called Driven. So I was helping the team in the early stages, Rennie Harlin, for example, and even met his wife at the time, Gina Davis. So these are very interesting worlds for a young man, but nowadays I'm not interested anymore in those kind of mainstream platforms.
Gotcha. A very good start to give you a very good idea of, and meet people from all over the world, different perspectives and so forth. And obviously traveling and having friends to go visit around the world, right? The traveling part. So you had a goal to travel to every single country, which you met, and then all of a sudden you said, well, I travel, I see all the nice things. What about, was that kind of the step, or how did you, when did this fascination of dangerous war zone kind of like traveling, when did this develop, and what was some of the first tastes of this new fascination that you had?
I think it started with my parents in Istanbul, because in the early 80s, Istanbul was a very difficult place, or Turkey. There had just been a putsch by the military. That was actually something to learn, which I later only could understand, that the top general, Kenan Evren at the time, was head of the Gladio troops, the secret stay-behind troops of NATO in Turkey. And these people were actually throwing bombs and putting it in the shoes of communists, so false flag attacks, and then saved the country with the military from those evil communists and installed a military regime. That's exactly the time when I went to Turkey. Kenan Evren, this general, was prosecuted at a very high age, so he never spent time in jail for it, but this is a common knowledge. And it's been the same system in Italy and Germany, that terror was perpetrated and put into other people's shoes, so to speak. And another interesting thing from Turkey at the time, the term deep state that we all like to use in the last years is actually coming from Turkey, because there was a accident after midnight in the middle of nowhere where 4 out of 5 people in the car died, and they turned out to be very high-level people who should not have been sitting together in that car. One was a mafia killer who was also implicated in the attack on John Paul II, the Pope at the time, and had several identities from the Turkish Secret Service as a contract killer. And the other was a Kurdish leader, and the next one was a mainstream mayor of a large city, and one was a top model, a woman. So this turned out to be a strange combination of people working together, and from this, some of the cleaning initiatives of President Erdogan took place, when he could clearly point at the cooperation of military people, Secret Service people, mafia kind of people, the Kurdish official opposition, to clean up the country at the time. It's called derin devlet in Turkish. It means deep state, and we certainly have that phenomenon in all the countries, especially in the West. So something to learn from my youth. This is how I got the first feeling of, let's say, kind of a war zone, a difficult place. And then much later, I came into real war zones, into all of them actually. And I wanted to understand what's going on, because I immediately saw that everything we see in our mainstream media is the opposite of the truth.
It's, yeah, and it's almost, it's so oversimplified too. It's, good guys against bad guys. That's literally what they boil it down to the general public, where a lot of these things, as you mentioned, it isn't as it is portrayed. It's sometimes the complete opposite, but it's also so simplified and dumbed down, right?
Yes, and we are all made to believe in the Western world that we are the good guys, which is absolutely not true. We are the bad guys in all those wars and terror events. Even in piracy, the West has a hand, and this is another main pillar of my book, that I'm describing in several countries how the West is orchestrating terror groups. In Mindanao, Philippines, the MILF, Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, or Abu Sayyaf, and the same in Somalia, the Abu Sayyaf, the Al-Shabaab, excuse me, And ISIS, anyway, I think everybody knows this nowadays, that it's all a scam orchestrated by the West, especially Israel, because ISIS never attacked Israel. And so I found this as a red thread throughout my danger zone travels, including, by the way, piracy at the Horn of Africa was also installed by the British. And this is, if you know where to look, also proven in the mainstream. And so this is what I found out, that in general, we, the West, are the bad guys. We are killing civilians. We are attacking populations for all kinds of evil purposes, usually just robbing the oil resources, or at least we want to have the navigation, the road, etc., or to control populations to move them against each other, like migration as a weapon, which we see all over the world at this point.
Tell me a little bit, because I think when we first met, one of the topics that came up is Chechnya, right? So that's kind of that's, I would say, over the past, I don't know, 20 something years, ever since I was younger, this was always something that you would hear about, right? And that was one of your interesting travels. And if you think about other areas that are on the news constantly, you have the Ukraine, which you've been in, you've been there too. Talk a little bit about that, and share a little bit of the interesting insights there, because I think that's a fascinating spot where I don't know a lot of people that have traveled over to Chechnya to go check it out, to go see what's going on.
Yes, I was for the first time in Chechnya, I believe in 2010, when it had just started to recover from two major civil wars. And I remember that in the Lonely Planet guide, at the time I was still looking into these kinds of books, it said traveling to Chechnya in Ingushetia without local security is like walking on the moon without a spacesuit. So I was nervous when I was there the first time, but I'm lucky I had a direct contact to the leading family, to President Kadyrov personally, through my one of my best buddies, who is in the luxury business, an Austrian, who had Kadyrov already as a client without knowing it. It just went over an importer in Moscow, and so we actually got the red carpet in Chechnya, in Grozny, early on, and I've been there at least a dozen times, and I call them my friends, and I have a very good impression of that country, and they have been a major factor in the war against Ukraine. The Chechens are the best warriors in the world. There's no doubt about that. But I do also know, on each side of the Ukrainian conflict, I know people, and I think it's important to describe that I don't just have one contact and I'm biased to one side. I try to see and meet people on both sides.
Gotcha. Talk to me a little bit about if you're picking a danger zone to go to, and you mentioned you had contacts. How do you put this together? How do you travel there? How do you meet? How do you navigate? How do you utilize security, if anything? You know, I think if a lot of people are listening to this and say, well, wait a second, so Dr. Danger Zone likes to travel to war zones. How does it's not that there's a tourism brochure that you could sign up and book, your excursions all online. Talk to me through the logistics a little bit.
Yes, the first trips were more difficult when one is a newbie without a track record. For example, I went to the Battle of Benghazi in Libya during the Arab Spring. I think that was May 2011, 2010 or 11. When there was a divided country by war and chaos in the east. So I was able to enter without a visa on the rebel side in the east from Cairo overland, which is, I think, more than 1,000 kilometers from Cairo to Benghazi. And we had to drive a certain route, so not to be, really in high danger. So I stayed in Benghazi in the Tibesti Hotel. The battle was just outside town. And I did not have contacts. I just went in and declared myself a journalist. The new rebel regime did not have rules yet. if Gaddafi had controlled that border, we would have had to have a proper visa, and it would have been difficult and everything. However, then on the ground, actually hiring a driver, a taxi, a long-distance taxi, which is very inexpensive in those countries. There were a lot of checkpoints, sometimes kids with a Kalashnikov, maybe 15 years old. One looked at my passport, and he actually made me scared because he saw a stamp from Iran. And he showed it to his buddies, all with Kalashnikovs, at this checkpoint, where there was actually a metal helmet with a bullet hole in it on a pole. So it was a real war zone feeling, and I was still new to this. And yeah, I was scared that this could be a problem with those kids. But in the end, they just laughed and then let us go, and everything went well. But it was actually after this trip that I knew I had to, pump up the adrenaline level and go to all these other places in conflict. And whenever possible, I tried to find an entree through a personal contact or recommendation, like in Chechnya. But I was in Afghanistan in the north, just like in Libya, as a tourist without any contacts. Later on, when I had already got a bit of a track record, and I had created this annual meeting of the most traveled people in the world, it's called ETIC, the Extreme Traveler International Congress. I was usually trying to go to places that are so difficult and so appealing to well-traveled people that I would get the top men and women from our scene. And this led to from one place to the other. And the highlight in my life was to be in the Colombian mountains in the founding republic of the FARC, the very well-known 50 years long, terror liberation group, however you want to call it. We were accompanied by the whole leadership of FARC. Number one, Timoshenko, and Victoria Sandino, a senator, and the foreign minister, and two are my friends still nowadays. One is the communications director, Martin Cruz, and one is the rebel, kind of Lara Croft, Tanja Nijmeijer from Holland, who's a very attractive idealist who went to fight at, I think, age 19 or 20 when she had met a Colombian FARC person and then survived more than 20 years in the jungle. And she's, I guess, a communist, and Martin Cruz used to be a communist. And this is, of course, for me, the opposite of the spectrum. But I respect these people for, trying to do something along their ideals. It's better to be, an idealist on the wrong side than a sheep who is completely controlled like a zombie by the system. So we became friends. And, in Colombia, where we went in the mountains to the founding area of the FARC, it's the hut where Manuel Marulanda in 1956 founded the FARC. Nobody had been since then. Even the FARC people hadn't been there. So it was a major adventure for everybody under the protection of United Nations and the police and the military battalions. That was the top end of all my, let's say, political trips into danger zones. And there were a lot of others, but it's all in my book.
And what I appreciate is you sit down with everybody and have conversations with everyone. Try to see how they see the world and, their thoughts. And even if it's something that's completely opposite or something that you don't necessarily agree with, you sit down and have conversations. And, as you probably, and I think you've shared that even though you're on complete opposites, there's a lot of overlapping stuff of things that people can agree on, right?
Yes. They have an enthusiasm, or had at the time. And if I was born in Colombia, the way I was born in Germany, I would for sure be a right-wing paramilitary if I would have to fight. But if I had been born like Martin Cruz in the mountains to a father who was already fighting for, help from the government, just that they have roads and sanitation and everything that was denied to them, and to be able to cultivate the land, I would have probably become a fighter for the left. with the Tanja Nijmeijer, it's different. She, has not been to the schools I went to, the universities I went. She doesn't socialize with ANCAP people, so she is still, let's say, a socialist, at least at heart. But she's a larger-than-life personality that I do respect, and I found super charismatic. And I don't want to be enemy with people. Wherever I go, I try to make friends and also listen to both sides. And those people who, agitate us into hating each other, which is especially along those lines of left and right, they shouldn't succeed so easily, because we can, even with being on the opposite sides, we can still remain friends in theory. I know in practice nowadays it's much different. Yeah.
So we've mentioned Chechnya, we've mentioned Ukraine, we mentioned Libya, which was Benghazi. We've also mentioned the jungles of Colombia. You did share in your story in Libya that there was a stamp of Iran in there too. So talk to me about that travel. Was that to a danger zone too, or that was more of just a visit to go and see that country itself?
I've been to Iran 4 times. I did a lot of overland travel there. It's a fantastic, beautiful country. It's a high-level civilization, and they manage to sustain themselves despite being under sanctions. Sanctions I've experienced, that means Western sanctions against other countries, I've experienced especially hard in North Korea. Very intelligent people, the same as South Koreans, obviously, but they have no energy to heat in the winter. So very difficult life circumstances there. Same in Venezuela. I was there before it became, let's say, the communists or super socialists, and they had the same problems before, to be honest. But now with the sanctions, it's getting worse. In Cuba, the sanctions are causing a lot of trouble to the local populations. And in Iran, it's a big country. It's a decentralized country. You find industry all over the place producing goods, so they are not dependent on outside markets. However, my closest contact is also in the luxury goods industry, and he gets his goods through the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe not now, I don't know, but it was always luxury goods that were not officially imported into the country. And he is at a high level in Iran. There is a high standard of living all over the country, but especially in Tehran. Even when I was there, and the last time was probably 2018, life was not, let's say, fundamentalist, religious. Of course, women were not that openly dressed, but even then, at the time, they were already walking without the scarf over the head, and maybe only when there was a religious police somewhere around the corner, they would put it back on. But a lot of the hardship because of religious things has been exaggerated by the Western propaganda.
Tell me a little bit about other areas that you share in your book that would knock the socks off our listeners and our viewers.
Well, for example, from Iran, I did one trip into northern Iraq, Kurdistan. I was there in 2007 and 2014, I believe. And I learned that there was a so-called Hamilton Road that was built by the British to supply, I think, the support of the British Empire for the Russians against the Germans in World War II. Not 100% sure if I recollect this correctly, but the interesting thing was that this very difficult road was constructed by the British in such a remote area, and that even before Germany had attacked Russia, the British had already attacked Iran and divided it. And nobody talks about this nowadays because they are the good guys. And so here I am now in northern Iraq, and I have not made any negative experiences there, even if it was harder times. The only negative experience was actually on the Turkish side of the Kurdish area. in my whole career as a traveler, I only had twice some kind of aggression or microaggressions because of religious things. And that was in this Kurdish area in East Turkey on that trip. And the one thing was I was with two young guys in a taxi cab driving me to the airport of Batman. It's really the name of it. And usually I avoid having two people in the same taxi for me, because that's already, a difficult situation if there's problems. And then they started talking about religion. I was a bit cocky and I said, I'm a gavur, I'm a non-believer. And I didn't think that this would cause so much aggression. And they were really angry. And I thought, okay, we're in the middle of nowhere. They will stop at the car. And then I have to really see how I battle myself out of that. But I used one trick there that I learned from a famous German journalist. His name was Peter Scholl-Latour. He actually accompanied the Ayatollah Khomeini to land in Tehran in 1979. And with that photo, with the Ayatollah, he traveled all over the world, and it opened doors in the Muslim world. Shiites, Sunni, didn't make a difference. And I have a collection of photos with me, even physical nowadays, when I'm traveling. And this was when I used to show off who I know and how powerful I am to these young guys, to get back the respect and to turn around the situation. And it did work. It made sense, because once you become weak, and you also become a victim. So I learned this before, but I employed this method here in the east of Turkey. And another little short anecdote is at the border to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has a border with Turkey. This is very important geostrategically at the moment, because the Trump corridor is being built there at the moment. But I was there in 2007, long before Trump. And it's a very remote area from this exclave called Nakhchivan into Turkey. And I was grilled heavily by the Turkish border guards for hours. And then they let me into Turkey. They said there's per year only 2 Westerners at the max crossing that border. And then they are not private people like me. Anyhow, then I arrive at night in this border city called Idir. And, I lived 6 years in Turkey as a kid. I know how to handle myself there, but I didn't realize how Muslim they had become in this area. So I don't drink alcohol in general, but here I thought the food was a bit rotten. So then I wanted to have a raki, the famous alcohol in Turkey that helps to digest and to clean up the system. And they said, no, they cannot serve it to me because it's haram, it's forbidden. They don't want this drunk in this area, but I could walk down. There's an official shop, a tekel shop. I could drink it there. So I did go to that shop, bought it, went back to the restaurant and poured some raki under the table and just drank it as a medicine. Yeah. And when I asked for the bill, they came to me, the 2 guys from the restaurant, and they could sniff that there was alcohol in the air. And also that caused enormous aggression. They were throwing the glass at me, it smashed at my feet. And they basically chased me away because I had, broken their rules, which for me as a guy who speaks Turkish and who knows the culture came as a surprise. But it was aggressive. And I did actually close the doors of my hotel room, relatively bad hotel there, with a cupboard against it, just to be safe, because they were so aggressive.
So there's been a couple of close calls. While in war zones, did you ever go to the front lines and put yourself in those situations?
Yes. What I just spoke about is kind of anecdotes from normal travel that everybody can run into.
Yes.
And I wanted to make the point that sometimes this religious element is tricky. We all know this. In a real war zone, I was, for example, 3 times in the Donbas since 2014, when the war really started. Donbas is the area between Ukraine and Russia that's contested. The Russian population there is under attack by the West since 2014, at least, since the putsch that was orchestrated by the West. And every time I was there, 2015, 2018, and 2021, there was mortar fired artillery from the west to the east on civilian areas. I heard it, I saw it. And on my last trip, 2021, I already had the contacts there that they trusted me, that they took me to the front line into the trench. And there were 6 mortar rounds fired while I was there in our direction, but not hitting anywhere nearby. But I was not in the army. I have no education in this regards. So I had my pants full. I didn't want to die for the Ukrainian war as a proxy of a proxy war. No, so that was a real war zone situation for sure in Donbas, in the trench.
So the book Dr. Dangerzone, which is available on Amazon, you just type in Dr. Dangerzone in search of truth in the most daring places, is available right now. So you can go on Amazon and order it. What is the adventures is quite incredible. I love the subtitle too, Searching for Truth. And I think that's the big part of it. Knowing you now for a number of years, you've always tried to search for the truth, and it's quite incredible to the lengths of which you will go to search for the truth in this. Any other just takeaway for our listeners and viewers of the book, and some other anecdotes that you share in the book as well that they might be interested in knowing?
Yes, this is the third and maybe the most important pillar of my book. The first pillar was trips that very few people have done. I wanted to have them written down to share my memory. The second is understanding and explaining how we are misled by warfare and terrorism and piracy. In all those conflicts that I've been, it's always the same. The West is the aggressor and puts terrorism into other people's shoes. In most cases, Islamist terror groups, so to speak. But now talking about truth in the most daring places, the most daring place to speak about the truth is at home, in our home countries. I'm writing in the initial chapter that the most brainwashed people in history are the Germans, because we have been misled about so much of our history, and most Germans don't even know. The propaganda is so intense. The propaganda in the West, in the United States, in the UK, in EU, is worse than in North Korea. In North Korea, at least people have a certain homogeneous system. They are among themselves, they fight for each other, and they maybe understand that it's a very centralized system, but they were also attacked by the US and others, so they stick together, and they know that television and the press is not saying 100% of the truth. But in the West, a lot of people think what comes out of television and the press is fact-checked and is done by professionals who are neutral and so on. And the amount of lies we have to digest in the West is just sickening nowadays. And we can't even talk about it openly, because when we mention the idea of truth, this is already an offense for a certain part of society, because they are immediately uncovered. Especially as a German, one cannot talk too openly about it, but the noose is also tightening in the US in this regards. And I don't know where this should lead if we cannot even point at the people who are designing all those aggressive wars and the terror and the piracy and the subversion and the fake money from the central banks. Not only the propaganda news, but also Hollywood that is destroying societies by completely wrong role models that destroy families, and the individual who doesn't know even what's the gender he has, because people are programmed to become dysfunctional and easily controlled as sheeple on a tax farm. That's the existence we're in. And I'm obviously critical of that to the extent that I can be in such a book. but it's the third pillar, and at the end of the day, the most important in my book.
Awesome. Do you have a website that you can direct people to because I know that you have a lot of interesting things to share. Is there a website, or is just the main place for people to go to grab a copy of the book, Amazon?
I have no blog or anything monetized out there. I do have my own travel memory, which is on a WordPress blog, which is non-monetized. I read somewhere that I have the biggest travel blog on the internet that's not monetized. And I also have put in that it doesn't show up in the Google searches and so on, because I don't want to be visible to people who I don't care about, but people who I do care about, who are interested in what I'm saying here, they can also contact me directly, for example, on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter as Dr. Dangerzone. And I look forward to interacting with whoever wants to know more about the trips and the truth that I brought back.
Fantastic. Well, Kolja, always a pleasure to speak with you and great to see you. And thank you so much for coming back on the show and talking about this very, very exciting book. Again, Dr. Dangerzone, In Search of Truth in the Most Daring Places, available on Amazon. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you, MC.
And thank you to all of my listeners and viewers for again spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me on the show. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. That's cashflowninja.com. We've got over 1,000 podcasts, 4 books, webinars, reports, and much, much more, all at cashflowninja.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the #1 newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset space, the Wealth Dojo. You can subscribe to the Wealth Dojo by going to cashflowninja.com/subscribe. Until next time, live infinitely. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation, and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.